Gunfire shredded the reinforced concrete, turning the isolated outpost into a slaughterhouse. Pinned down and bleeding, an infantry platoon braced for total annihilation. They thought the quiet woman taking cover nearby was just a terrified civilian liability. They were catastrophically wrong. She wasn't hiding, she was evaluating the wind. Dust coated everything at Firebase Kilo, a fine, suffocating powder that tasted like copper and regret. Nestled deep within the hostile, jagged valleys of the Arghandab region, the remote outpost was a glorified target. For the men of the Army's 10th Mountain Division stationed there, every day was an exercise in waiting for the other shoe to drop. Captain David Miller rubbed his bloodshot eyes, surveying the perimeter. His platoon was exhausted, undermanned, and currently burdened with a babysitting detail they could not afford. Harper Hayes stood near the crumbling eastern barricade, adjusting a pair of thick-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down her sweat-slicked nose. Clad in oversized khaki tactical pants, a generic contractor polo, and an armored vest that looked 3 sizes too big, she was the picture of an out-of-place non-combatant. Officially, she was a civilian structural engineer contracted by the Department of Defense to assess the integrity of the valley's local dam and the outpost's deteriorating bunkers. Unofficially, to the men of the platoon, she was a walking, talking liability. Sergeant Thomas Reed spat a stream of chewing tobacco into the dirt, glaring in her direction. "I still don't understand why Command sent a structural engineer into the hottest sector in the valley," Reed grumbled, shifting the weight of his M4 rifle. "We're supposed to be running security patrols, Captain, not playing bodyguard to a clipboard warrior who jumps every time a generator backfires." Captain Miller sighed, feeling the sharp sting of an impending headache. "Command has its reasons, Reed. She does her evaluation, she gets back on the next transport helo, and we go back to our jobs. Just keep her away from the mortar pits and make sure she doesn't wander outside the wire." Harper appeared oblivious to the disdain radiating from the soldiers. She tapped her pen against a thick clipboard, muttering to herself about load-bearing concrete and stress fractures. When she approached the command tent, she kept her head down, her posture submissive and small. "Excuse me, Captain Miller," she said, her voice carrying a slight, nervous tremor. "I need to examine the observation tower's foundation. The schematics show a severe degradation in the reinforced rebar." Reed rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. "With all due respect, ma'am," he interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension, "that tower is the only thing giving my snipers a clear line of sight. We don't need you tapping on it with a little hammer and compromising our overwatch. Just stay in the civilian quarters until the bird comes to take you home." Harper blinked behind her thick glasses, clutching her clipboard tighter to her chest. "I'm just trying to do my job, Sergeant. If that tower collapses under heavy fire..." "If we take heavy fire, ma'am, a crumbling brick is going to be the least of your problems," Reed snapped. "Leave the war to the professionals." Harper offered a meek nod, backing away slowly. "Understood. I'll just review my notes in the bunker." She scurried off, her boots clumsily kicking up dust. Private First Class Connor Davies watched her go, shaking his head. "Man, she looks like a stiff breeze would knock her over. If things go sideways out here, we're going to have to carry her out." Things went sideways exactly 14 minutes later. It started not with a gunshot, but with a terrifying high-pitched whistle that cut through the oppressive afternoon heat. Captain Miller barely had time to scream a warning before the first mortar shell slammed into the motor pool, turning 2 Humvees into a twisting fireball of metal and black smoke. The shockwave threw men to the ground, shattering the false peace of the valley. "Contact! Contact front!" Reed bellowed, scrambling behind a wall of sandbags as a deafening barrage of heavy machine gun fire erupted from the elevated ridgeline to their north. The insurgents had moved under the cover of a sandstorm the night before, digging into the rocky cliffs. Now they were unleashing hell. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the air, impacting the exact observation tower Harper had warned them about. The explosion was catastrophic. Concrete and steel rained down on the compound. Up in the nest, Corporal Benjamin Ford, the platoon's designated marksman, took the brunt of the blast. His body was thrown violently against the railing, and his prized weapon, an advanced M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, tumbled over the edge, crashing into the dirt courtyard below. "Ford is down! I repeat, Ford is down!" Davies screamed into his comms, pinned behind a crumbling barrier as bullets chewed the concrete inches from his face. The outpost was instantly trapped in a devastating crossfire. 2 PKM machine guns on the ridge were laying down an impenetrable wall of lead, systematically pinning the Americans into tight pockets of cover. Captain Miller tried to maneuver his men, but a ricochet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him into the dirt with a ragged cry. "Captain's hit!" Reed yelled, his voice cracking with panic. He blind-fired over the sandbags, the chaotic spray of his M4 doing nothing to suppress the elevated enemy positions. "We need covering fire. Where the hell is our air support?" "30 minutes out," the radio man shrieked, cowering beneath a rec table. "They've got the valley zeroed! If we move, we die!" Through the smoke and the deafening roar of automatic weapons, the platoon was bleeding out, systematically outgunned and outmaneuvered. The men braced for the final assault, knowing the insurgents would soon sweep down the hill to finish the job. In the chaos, no one was looking at the civilian bunker. No one noticed the heavy steel door kick open. And no one noticed the terrified, clumsy engineer shedding her oversized vest, dropping her clipboard, and taking off her thick-rimmed glasses. Panic is a contagion, but so is profound, deadly calm. Inside the smoke-choked courtyard, the men of the 10th Mountain were losing their grip. Sergeant Reed was frantically trying to drag the bleeding Captain Miller behind a shattered concrete pillar, slipping in the mud and blood. The incoming fire was deafening, a relentless metallic drumming that fractured the mind and shattered morale. They were trapped in a fatal funnel, and the enemy gunners on the ridge knew exactly how to keep them there. Harper stepped out of the bunker into the maelstrom. Gone was the nervous slouch. Gone was the trembling hands and the submissive gaze. Her posture had radically transformed. Her spine was perfectly straight, her shoulders relaxed but locked with lethal intent. She moved through the chaotic courtyard not with the frantic, erratic scramble of a panicked civilian, but with the fluid, low center of gravity glide of an apex predator perfectly comfortable in the violence. A burst of PKM fire chewed the dirt a foot from her boots. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes, stripped of the distracting glasses, were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of fear. They darted across the battlefield, rapidly processing variables, enemy muzzle flashes, the distance to the ridge, the angle of elevation, the wind velocity whipping the black smoke across the compound. "Hey, are you insane?" Sergeant Reed screamed, his face smeared with soot and Captain Miller's blood. He saw Harper walking upright through the crossfire. "Get your head down, you stupid civilian! You're gonna get yourself killed." Harper ignored him completely. Her target wasn't cover. Her target was the M2010 sniper rifle lying in the dirt, 20 yards away, abandoned when Corporal Ford fell from the tower. She broke into a sprint. It was a precise, tactical bound. She hit the ground sliding, scooping up the heavy rifle in one seamless motion. To a trained eye, the way her hands instantly found the weapon's center of gravity and naturally indexed along the chassis would have been a massive red flag. Private Davies watched in stunned disbelief as the structural engineer racked the bolt of the sniper rifle with terrifying authority, ejecting a dust-covered round and slamming a fresh one into the chamber to ensure a clean feed. Harper dropped into a prone position behind a collapsed section of the reinforced wall. She didn't blindly shoulder the weapon. She quickly adjusted the bipod, settled her breathing, and pressed her eye to the Leupold scope. Her thumb flicked the elevation turret, adjusting for the 600-meter upward incline, rapidly dialing in her dope data on previous engagements, based entirely on mental math and environmental observation. Wind was blowing left to right at roughly 8 knots. She held her reticle favoring the left edge of the target. Up on the ridge, the primary insurgent machine gunner was screaming orders, preparing to signal the ground assault. He leaned over his weapon, entirely confident in his overwhelming superiority. Harper exhaled slowly, letting the air bleed from her lungs. Between the natural pause of her heartbeat, she applied steady, even pressure to the trigger. Crack. The explosive roar of the 300 Winchester Magnum round temporarily deafened Davies, who was huddled just 5 feet away. 600 meters up the ridge, the insurgent machine gunner's head snapped violently backward. The heavy PKM went instantly silent, the gunner slumping over the barrel like a discarded rag doll. Silence momentarily gripped the outpost. The Americans stopped shooting. The insurgents stopped shooting. For a split second, shock reigned supreme. "Target down," Harper muttered, her voice an icy, unrecognizable whisper. Without taking her eye off the scope, She racked the bolt. Shk. A smoking brass casing ejected, spinning through the air. Before the enemy could comprehend what had just happened, Harper acquired her second target. The assistant gunner on the ridge scrambled to take over the PKM. Harper didn't wait for him to grab the trigger. She fired again. Crack. The second insurgent folded in half, pitched forward over the cliff edge, and tumbled into the valley below. What the? Reed gasped, abandoning his medical kit for a moment to stare at the woman behind the rifle. The civilian was gone. In her place was a machine. Enemy RPG, 3 o'clock high, behind the limestone outcropping, Harper barked, her voice suddenly cutting through the chaos with absolute, undeniable authority. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a tactical command delivered with the cadence of a seasoned operator. Davies, give me a trace on that boulder, draw his fire. Davies, running purely on instinct and the sheer alpha command radiating from her voice, blindly popped up and fired a 3-round burst at the boulder. The insurgent with the rocket launcher leaned out to return fire. He never pulled the trigger. Harper's third round caught him dead in the center of his chest. The impact detonated the RPG warhead he was holding. A massive explosion rocked the ridge, sending a shower of limestone and enemy combatants into the air. In less than 15 seconds, Harper had systematically dismantled the enemy's suppressing fire, executing 3 near-impossible shots with the cold precision of a surgeon. Captain Miller, clutching his bleeding shoulder, looked up at the woman who had just saved his life. "Who the hell are you?" he groaned, entirely bewildered. Harper didn't look back. She kept her eye glued to the scope, scanning the ridge for remaining threats. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of any bureaucratic pretense. It was the voice of a Tier 1 operator, a ghost who officially didn't exist, attached to a Naval Special Warfare Development Group element that operated entirely in the shadows. "I'm the structural engineer, Captain," Harper said coldly, chambering her 4th round. "And right now, I'm finding the structural weaknesses in their front line. Now get on that radio, call in a sitrep, and tell your boys to push the left flank before they regroup. Move." Gunfire continued to echo across the Arghandab Valley, but the tempo had drastically shifted. The overwhelming, suffocating wall of insurgent lead had faltered, broken by 4 surgically precise sniper rounds. Behind the shattered concrete of the command bunker, the men of the 10th Mountain Division stared at the woman they had relentlessly mocked just 30 minutes prior. Harper did not look back. She remained locked into the optics of the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. "I said move, Sergeant." Harper's voice cracked like a whip, slicing through Sergeant Thomas Reed's paralyzing shock. They just lost their heavy guns and their anti-armor capability. They are experiencing a command vacuum. We have exactly 90 seconds before their local commander reorganizes them for a flanking maneuver. Take your fire team and suppress the tree line to the east. Reed blinked, his combat instincts finally overriding his bruised ego. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, yes, sir. Davies, with me. Lay down suppressing fire on that tree line." As the infantrymen scrambled to their new positions, their M4S roaring to life, Captain David Miller pressed a blood-soaked gauze pad against his shoulder. He grimaced, dragging himself closer to Harper's firing position. "You're not a structural engineer contracted by the DoD, Miller wheezed, his face pale from blood loss. "Who sent you?" Harper's finger rested just outside the trigger guard. "Lieutenant Commander Harper Jenkins, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I report directly to Joint Special Operations Command, under directives established by Admiral William McRaven." The engineering contract was a sanitized cover. My actual objective was to conduct subterranean recon on the dam facility. Intelligence confirmed that a high-value target, a notorious warlord named Jalaluddin, was using the old Soviet drainage tunnels as a weapons cache and transit route. Miller's eyes widened in realization. "Dev, Gru, SEAL Team 6, the elite of the elite. You're a Tier 1 operator, and command just left you here, alone?" "I am never alone, Captain," Jenkins replied coldly. "But right now, my overwatch is 20 miles away, and we have a severely degraded perimeter. Jalaluddin's men didn't attack this outpost to kill you. They attacked it to breach the secondary tunnels beneath your motor pool. They want their weapons back, and they are willing to wipe your platoon off the map to get them." Before Miller could process the massive intelligence failure that had led to his platoon guarding a terrorist armory unknowingly, a sharp whistle echoed from the eastern ridge. Harper instantly shifted the massive sniper rifle, tracking the movement through her Leupold scope. "They're probing our right flank," Jenkins muttered, her eye fixed on the glass. 3 tangos, moving fast through the brush. They have PKMs. They're trying to set up an enfilade. She didn't wait for the insurgents to plant their bipods. Jenkins calculated the bullet drop, factored in the spin drift of the 300 Winchester Magnum round, and squeezed the trigger. The heavy rifle bucked against her shoulder. Crack! A shadow in the brush collapsed instantly. She cycled the bolt with terrifying speed. Crack! A second shadow fell. The third insurgent panicked, dropping his weapon and sprinting back toward the rocks. Jenkins let him go. A running, terrified man was a fantastic psychological weapon against his own comrades. "Ammo check," Jenkins barked, abandoning the sniper rifle as the magazine ran dry. She unholstered a customized Sig Sauer P 226 MK25 from a concealed Kydex holster she had worn beneath her oversized vest. Simultaneously, she scooped up the M4 rifle dropped by the wounded Corporal Ford. "I've got 3 mags left," Private Davies yelled over the deafening chatter of gunfire. "2 here," Reed shouted, his face tight with grim determination. "But they are massing behind the northern wall. I can hear them screaming. They are getting ready to rush us." Jenkins did a rapid tactical assessment. The outpost was situated in a bowl, surrounded by elevated ridges. The insurgents had the high ground, the numbers, and the momentum, despite her initial disruption. The army platoon was bleeding out, low on ammunition, and completely out of heavy ordnance. "Captain, where is that air support?" Jenkins demanded, sliding a fresh magazine into the M4 and slapping the bolt catch. Radio man says, 15 minutes, Miller groaned, struggling to stay conscious. F-15 E-Strike Eagles inbound from Bagram, but we can't give them coordinates. The laser designator was in the tower when the RPG hit. It's buried under the rubble. Jenkins's eyes darted toward the smoldering ruins of the observation tower. The rubble was entirely exposed to enemy fire. Anyone running out there would be cut to ribbons in seconds. But without the designator, the fast movers couldn't drop their precision-guided munitions on the enemy's staging area. The insurgents would overrun the walls in less than 5 minutes. "Hold the line," Jenkins ordered, her voice eerily calm. She stripped off the heavy, cumbersome body armor she had been forced to wear for her disguise, leaving only her tactical shirt and a lightweight chest rig. Speed was going to be her only armor. "Commander, what are you doing?" Reed yelled, realizing her intent. "That courtyard is a death trap. You can't make it to that rubble." "Sergeant, when I move, I want you and every swinging dick in this compound to dump your remaining magazines into that northern ridge. You give me 3 seconds of cover. Do you understand?" Reed swallowed hard, looking at the fierce, unyielding determination in the eyes of a woman he had called a clipboard warrior just an hour ago. He nodded firmly. "Yes, Commander. We've got your back." Jenkins crouched like a sprinter in the starting blocks at the edge of the bunker. She took one deep, centering breath, visualizing the path through the debris. "Suppressing fire! Go, go, go!" Reed roared. Every remaining weapon in the outpost erupted in a deafening crescendo. The Americans poured a furious stream of lead into the ridgeline, forcing the insurgent gunners to duck behind the rocks. In that microscopic window of opportunity, the ghost of Devgru exploded out of the bunker, sprinting straight into the kill zone. Dirt and pulverized concrete erupted around Jenkins's boots as she sprinted across the open courtyard. The insurgent gunners on the ridge quickly realized what was happening and redirected their fire. Tracers zipped past her ears, sounding like angry hornets. The ground was chewed to pieces inches from her heels. She didn't zigzag. She didn't dive for cover. She ran with raw, calculated efficiency, keeping her center of gravity low and her momentum driving forward. She hit the rubble of the fallen observation tower with a bone-jarring slide, scraping her knees and tearing the fabric of her pants. Bullets pinged against the twisted steel rebar directly above her head, showering her with sparks and concrete dust. "Designator! Designator!" she muttered, frantically digging through the heavy, smoking debris with her bare hands. Her fingers caught the edge of a heavy olive-drab Pelican case. She yanked it free, ignoring the jagged piece of concrete that sliced a deep gash across her forearm. She popped the latches. Inside rested the AN-PEQ 1A Special Operations Forces laser marker. Miraculously, the lens was intact.
"I have the package," Jenkins screamed into her tactical headset, patching her comms directly into the command net. Big Eye, this is Voodoo 1 Actual. Do you copy? Static hissed in her ear before a crisp, authoritative voice broke through. Voodoo 1 Actual, this is Big Eye. We read you loud and clear. Be advised, we have two F-15S on station, call sign Viper 1 and Viper 2. Awaiting your target package. Viper 1, I am painting a target on the northern ridge. Grid coordinates Echo Tango 49er. I need immediate suppression. JDAM strike. Danger close. Voodoo 1 Actual, that grid is dangerously close to your position. Confirm danger close. I said danger close, Viper 1. Bring the rain or there won't be anyone left down here to extract, Jenkins shouted. She rolled onto her back, resting the heavy laser designator on her knee to stabilize it. She aimed the invisible beam precisely at the largest cluster of rocks on the northern ridge, where she knew the insurgent commander was staging the final assault. Lacing target. Time to impact? 30 seconds, Voodoo 1 Actual. Keep your head down. The insurgents, sensing the impending strike or simply eager to finish the slaughter, stood up from their cover. A horde of fighters crested the ridge, screaming war cries as they began their charge down the slope toward the battered outpost. Back in the command bunker, Reed and Davies watched in horror. They're coming, Davies screamed, his rifle clicking empty. We're out of ammo. Hold fast, Jenkins's voice boomed over the localized comms. Do not move. 20 seconds. The insurgents were halfway down the slope, their weapons blazing. Bullets chewed the sandbags, shattered the remaining windows, and tore through the canvas tents. Jenkins held the laser perfectly steady, completely exposed in the rubble, staring death right in the face without a single flinch. 10 seconds. The roar of the incoming fighter jets began to vibrate in their chests, a low, guttural mechanical scream that rapidly escalated into a deafening shriek. 5 seconds. Jenkins finally dropped the designator and buried her face into the dirt, wrapping her arms tightly around her head. The sky cracked open. Two 2,000-pound joint direct attack munitions slammed into the northern ridge with apocalyptic fury. The shockwave was unimaginable. The ground bucked violently, throwing men into the air. A massive wall of heat, dust, and pulverized rock washed over the outpost, turning the afternoon sun pitch black. The deafening roar of the explosion rattled the teeth in their skulls, followed immediately by the terrifying sound of thousands of tons of mountain collapsing in on itself. For 2 agonizing minutes, Firebase Kilo was completely silent, buried under a thick, choking cloud of gray dust. Slowly, the dust began to settle. Sergeant Reed coughed violently, pushing a fallen sandbag off his chest. He blinked through the haze, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. "Sound off," he croaked, his voice raw. "Davies, alive." A voice groaned from the corner. "Miller, I'm still here," the captain wheezed. Reed frantically scanned the courtyard. The rubble of the tower was completely obscured by smoke. "Commander Jenkins! Commander!" From the shifting gray fog, a silhouette emerged. Lieutenant Commander Harper Jenkins walked slowly back into the compound. Her clothes were torn, her face was smeared with soot and blood from the gash on her arm, and she was coated head to toe in a thick layer of pulverized rock. But her posture was as rigid and unyielding as steel. She calmly wiped the dirt from her tactical radio. "Viper 1, good hits," she said quietly. "Target destroyed. Send the medevac birds. We have wounded." 45 minutes later, the unmistakable thumping of UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters filled the valley. But these weren't standard Army medevac choppers. These were heavily modified MH-60M Blackhawks from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. The birds touched down in a storm of dust. Heavily armed operators from a Tier 1 Quick Reaction Force poured out, instantly securing the perimeter with terrifying efficiency. A tall, imposing officer with stars on his collar stepped off the lead bird. It was General Scott Miller, the commander of JSOC forces in the theater. He didn't walk toward the wounded captain. He walked straight up to the bloodied, dirt-covered woman standing quietly by the command bunker. General Miller snapped a crisp salute. "Hell of a job holding the line, Commander Jenkins," the general said, his voice carrying immense respect. "Your intel was right. We secured the underground cache. You saved a lot of lives today." "Just doing my job, sir," Jenkins replied smoothly, returning the salute. Sergeant Reed, being loaded onto a stretcher by the medics, watched the exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes,
He remembered calling her a liability. He remembered telling her to leave the war to the professionals. He felt his face burn with absolute shame. As Jenkins turned to board the extraction chopper, she paused and walked over to Reed's stretcher. She looked down at the battered sergeant, her cold, calculating eyes softening just a fraction. "For the record, Sergeant," Jenkins said, a faint, razor-sharp smirk touching her lips, "I actually do have a master's degree in structural engineering. The concrete in that tower was absolutely substandard." Before Reed could stammer out an apology, she turned and disappeared into the belly of the Black Hawk, leaving the men of the 10th Mountain Division forever haunted by the civilian who turned out to be the deadliest weapon in the valley. Wasn't that ending absolutely mind-blowing? Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that cover is a highly classified DevGru operator. If you loved this intense, action-packed military true story, you have to hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends to show them what true bravery looks like. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic, classified combat stories. What was your favorite moment? Comment down below.